Infamous Iron Man. Victor Von Doom, one of Marvel's greatest villains, decides to walk the path of redemption, not as Doom but as Iron Man. So in Infamous Iron Man 2016, written by Brian Michael Bendis, we witness one of the boldest reinventions of any Marvel character, Dr. Doom stepping into the role of Tony Stark after Stark's apparent death, as a genuine attempt to become a hero. Following the multiverse-shattering events of Secret Wars 2015, where Doom briefly wielded godlike power as the architect of Battleworld, he experiences a moment of clarity. He sees firsthand the consequences of his endless thirst for control and power. Stripped of his scars and cosmic power, he resolves to do something no one expects. With Tony presumed dead after the events of Civil War II, the world is left vulnerable. Doom steps into the vacuum not with arrogance but with a surprising sense of purpose. He creates a new suit of armor, combining advanced Stark technology with his own Latvian genius. He doesn't take the title Iron Man lightly. In fact, he fully embraces it, calling himself Infamous Iron Man, and fully aware that the world will never trust him. He begins hunting down villains like Mad Thinker and Diablo, and he operates in the shadows, and his mere presence is enough to strike fear into criminals and heroes alike. Yet the world refuses to accept him. The superhero community is deeply suspicious. Old foes like Ben Grimm aka The Thing and S.H.I.E.L.D. relentlessly pursue him, believing that this is just another Doom manipulation. But beneath the armor we see a Victor Von Doom who is genuinely struggling with the weight of his past. He even visits Tony Stark's AI, which serves as his occasional conscience, providing sharp commentary on Victor's choices. And what's brilliant about Infamous Iron Man is that it never lets you forget who Doom is, even as it forces you to wonder if redemption is truly possible for him. Doom questions himself constantly, haunted by visions of his mother and his failures, but he also shows moments of real heroism, saving civilians, sparing enemies, and even risking his life to do the right thing. Victor's journey as Iron Man isn't about pretending to be Tony Stark. It's about proving he can be more than Dr. Doom. He embraces the legacy of Iron Man while trying to atone for his sins, carrying the burden of both his dark past and his hopes for a better future. Elektra becomes Daredevil. Known for years as an assassin, mercenary, and occasional anti-hero, Elektra's rise to take on Matt Murdock's identity in Daredevil 2020 was not only a thrilling twist but a deeply meaningful transformation, both for her character and the legacy of the Devil of Hell's Kitchen. At the time, Matt Murdock was facing the consequences of accidentally killing a man while fighting crime. True to his moral code, Matt chose to accept responsibility, serving a prison sentence rather than evade justice. But Matt knew that while he was behind bars, Hell's Kitchen couldn't be left undefended, and that's where Elektra stepped in. Elektra wasn't forced into the role. She was once a lethal assassin trained by the hand, and had long walked the thin line between villain and hero, driven by her own codes of honor, but never truly bound by morality the way Matt was. Yet when the streets of Hell's Kitchen needed protection, she saw an opportunity to not only fill the void left by Daredevil, but to redeem herself. But make no mistake, Elektra's Daredevil is her own version of the Mantle. While she honors Matt's legacy, she refuses to be a mere imitation. She embraces the costume and brings her own ruthless fighting style, blending brutal assassin techniques with Daredevil's acrobatic brawling. And perhaps most interestingly, she makes a vow to Matt. While wearing the Daredevil costume, she will not kill. And what makes Elektra's turn as Daredevil so compelling is that it flips her entire character arc on its head. She goes from a lone assassin driven by vengeance and personal codes to a symbol of hope and protection for a community. She fights not for herself, but for the people of Hell's Kitchen, a place that once represented everything chaotic in her life, and now a place she fights to preserve. So she's not just wearing the costume, she's redefining it. And this transformation proves that the Devil of Hell's Kitchen can come in many forms, and sometimes it takes a former assassin to protect a city full of sinners. Loki becomes Sorcerer Supreme. This wild development happened in Doctor Strange 2015, 381. This story is not a what-if, not an alternate universe, it's mainline continuity. At the time, Stephen Strange had grown weakened and weary, having faced countless mystical threats that left his connection to the magical arts fractured. Loki, never one to miss an opportunity, saw the vulnerability and petitioned to Vishanti, the ancient deities who empowered the Sorcerer Supreme. And surprisingly, they agreed, and with a flash of green magic and trickery, Loki becomes the Sorcerer Supreme. But here's the thing about Loki. He's not a simple villain. When he claims this title, he actually tries to use it for good. At least his version of it. And just because Loki wears the cloak and wields the Eye of Agamotto, doesn't mean he's free from his own nature. He's still a trickster god, and his schemes half-truths and manipulations pile up fast. It turns out that Loki didn't just stumble into this role, he orchestrated a plan to steal the mantle, seeing it as the ultimate power play in this ongoing journey of self-justification and personal reinvention. And Stephen Strange, now powerless, isn't about to let this stand. He becomes something of an underground magic rebel, working from the shadows to undermine Loki's rule. And their rivalry turns from physical confrontations to a cerebral chess game of spells, tricks, and mystique politics. Strange knows Loki's heart is too tainted for the role, no matter how good his intentions might appear. And the story reaches a wild climax when Strange reveals that he allowed Loki to take the mantle, knowing it would set events into motion that ultimately lead to a greater good. And Loki ultimately steps away from the title. So for a brief, strange moment, Loki wasn't just the god of mischief, he was the Sorcerer Supreme, standing at the crossroads of chaos and responsibility. Steve Rogers becomes Nomad. One of the most defining moments in Steve Rogers' history came when he chose to shed the mantle of Captain America and become something radically different. Nomad, the man without a country. This wasn't about power or a new identity for the sake of it. It was a story about ideals versus institutions. The transformation happened in Captain America 180 in 1974. The United States had just gone through the trauma of Watergate, and trust in the government was at an all-time low. In the Marvel Universe, Steve Rogers discovered that a secret cabal known as a Secret Empire had infiltrated the highest levels of the US government. Even worse, the leader of the Secret Empire was revealed to be a high-ranking government official, heavily implied to be the president himself. For Steve Rogers, this revelation was devastating, and as Captain America, he stood for the ideals of his country: truth, justice, and liberty. But seeing corruption at the very heart of the system forced him to confront a painful truth. The flag and the institution he fought for were not the same thing as the ideals he believed in. So Steve abandoned the identity of Captain America, believing that he could no longer represent a nation that had betrayed its own values. But Steve is, at his core, a man of action and principle. He didn't retire, he reinvented himself and became Nomad. As Nomad, Steve adapted a completely new look, a darker, more stripped-down costume with a flowing cape and a starless chest, symbolizing his separation from the flag. He no longer fought as a patriotic symbol, but as a free agent of justice, traveling the country and continuing to fight for the people, even if he wasn't doing it under the stars and stripes. And this period in Steve's life is crucial because it shows the depth of his moral compass. He wasn't blindly loyal to authority, he was loyal to principles. Even without the shield, the costume, or the title, Steve continued to be a hero, and his sense of justice was never about recognition or symbols. It was about doing what's right even when the world is wrong. And eventually Steve reclaimed the mantle of Captain America after realizing that he could still embody the ideals of the nation even if its institutions faltered. And even long after Steve returned to being Cap, the name Nomad lived on, passed to others like Jack Monroe and Ricky Barnes, serving as a reminder that heroism isn't about nationality, it's about courage, conviction, and doing what's right, even when you stand alone. Psylocke becomes Captain Britain. Betsy Braddock, also known as Psylocke, has worn many titles throughout her complex Marvel history: Telepath, Assassin, X-Men, and in Excalibur in 2019, Betsy steps into the role that once belonged to her brother, Brian Braddock, and becomes not just a protector of Britain, but a champion of the multiverse and Otherworld itself. To understand the significance of this, we have to go back to her origins. Betsy is Brian Braddock's twin sister, originally a telepath and skilled martial artist who for years operated as Psylocke. Her journey was already complicated. She spent years trapped in the body of the Japanese assassin, Kwanon, making her a warrior who constantly struggled with questions of identity and belonging. But despite this, she became one of the deadliest members of the X-Men, wielding her psychic blade with lethal precision. And during the dawn of X era, the mutant nation of Krakoa forms, and with it comes a resurgence of mutant influence across dimensions. The mystical realm of Otherworld, which serves as a nexus of realities, finds itself under threat. Traditionally, the protector of this realm is Captain Britain, a mantle that comes with the Amulet of Right, a mystical artifact of immense power. But when the original Captain Britain becomes corrupted by Morgan Le Fay, the amulet chooses Betsy instead. In that moment, she doesn't just inherit the title, she claims it. As Captain Britain, Betsy blends her formidable psychic abilities with the enchanted power of the amulet and forges her own path. She navigates the tensions between Britain and Krakoa, balancing her duties as a mutant ambassador with her role as a protector of British Isles. She faces distrust from the British government, skepticism from her fellow mutants, and even the mystical trials of Otherworld. But through it all, she remains resilient, carving out her place as a symbol of strength, unity, and hope. But most importantly, Betsy's Captain Britain isn't about leaving Psylocke behind. It's about embracing her full self. She carries both identities with her, not as burdens, but as sources of power. One of the wildest and most stylish identity swaps in recent Marvel history comes during the Fall of X era, when Nightcrawler takes on the mantle of the Uncanny Spider-Man. During Fall of X, the mutant nation of Krakoa collapses, and mutants worldwide become targets once again. Orchis, a human supremacist organization, launches coordinated attacks. For many mutants, it's a time of fear and exile. But for Nightcrawler, rather than hide in the shadows, Kurt embraces a new identity to fight back. That's when he becomes the Uncanny Spider-Man. Wearing a modified Spider-Man suit, with his signature swashbuckler flair, complete with a blue and red color scheme tailored to him, Kurt swings into action in Uncanny Spider-Man 1 in 2023. His new persona serves several purposes. It allows him to operate in public spaces without immediately being identified as a mutant, and it lets him play with his natural agility, acrobatics, and teleportation in a new crowd-pleasing way. And of course, his powers aren't spider-based, and he even keeps his signature tail, wrapping it into his new combat moves, giving him an almost otherworldly presence as Spider-Man. But beneath the mask, this transformation is about more than tactics. Nightcrawler has always been a man of hope and resilience. Despite being demon-like in appearance, he has consistently been one of the kindest, most optimistic X-Men, believing in unity and compassion even when the world rejected him. So becoming the Uncanny Spider-Man allows him to symbolize those values, while masking his mutant identity from a public growing more hostile every day. And he even remarks that being Spider-Man is fun, something Kurt hasn't had much of in a world falling apart. But under the humor and swashbuckling charm, there's a deep pain. He's carrying the weight of Krakoa's fall, the loss of friends, and the constant pressure of being a mutant in hiding. And through this disguise, Kurt finds a way to keep fighting, without losing himself to despair. Winter Soldier becomes Captain America. Of all the Marvel heroes who have taken up another's mantle, Bucky Barnes becoming Captain America is one of the most popular, emotional, and thematically rich stories in Marvel history. The seeds of this moment were planted long ago. Bucky Barnes was once Steve Rogers' loyal sidekick during World War II, but fate took a dark turn when Bucky was presumed dead after a bomb exploded during a mission. Bucky did survive, but his broken body was recovered by Soviet operatives, and his mind was wiped and reprogrammed, turning him into the Winter Soldier. Years later, Steve Rogers, now in the modern age, discovered that his lost friend was alive, but under the control of his enemies. Steve fought to free Bucky from his programming, using their shared history and deep bond to help him remember who he truly was. Steve succeeded, and Bucky began the long, painful road to redemption, haunted by the atrocities he committed as the Winter Soldier. Then came the moment that changed everything. In the death of Captain America's storyline, Steve Rogers was assassinated following the events of Civil War. The Marvel Universe was left reeling, and America was without its symbol of hope. Tony Stark, recognizing the weight of Steve's legacy and knowing that the world needed Captain America now more than ever, offered the shield to Bucky Barnes. At first, Bucky refused. He didn't feel worthy, but eventually he accepted, not because he wanted to replace Steve, but because he wanted to honor him and prove to himself and the world that he could be something more than his past. As Captain America, Bucky brought a grittier, more tactical edge to the role. Unlike Steve's shining idealism, Bucky fought like a man who knew the ugliness of war up close. He combined the symbol of the shield with the pragmatism of the Winter Soldier, often carrying a firearm alongside the iconic shield. His fighting style was brutal and efficient, yet deeply protective, redefining what it meant to be Captain America. And Bucky's time as Cap wasn't just about honoring Steve's legacy, it was about atonement. He faced distrust from the public and skepticism from fellow heroes. He battled old enemies and his own inner demons, but through it all, he earned his place, proving that even someone with blood on their hands could rise to become a symbol of hope. Reed Richards becomes Doctor Doom. In the Earth X universe, Earth 9997, Marvel explored a darker, grimmer future where nearly every human on Earth has developed superpowers, and the cost of power weighs heavily on the heroes we thought we knew. Among the most shocking twists in this alternate reality is the fate of Reed Richards, the leader of the Fantastic Four, who does the unthinkable. He becomes Doctor Doom. In this dystopian world, Reed lives in crippling regret over the tragedies that have befallen humanity and the losses suffered by his own family. The Fantastic Four are no more, and Reed, a man defined by his relentless desire to solve problems, failed to save those closest to him, and that failure consumes him. Racked with guilt and blaming himself for everything that went wrong, Reed retreats into isolation in Castle Doom, Victor Von Doom's old stronghold in Latveria. But Reed doesn't just hide away, he takes it a step further. He assumes the identity of Doctor Doom himself, donning Victor's iconic armor and mask and becoming the very man he spent his life opposing. But here's the brilliance of this twist. Reed does not become Doom in the traditional villainous sense. He becomes Doom as an act of penance. In his mind, he deserves the mask, the scars, the legacy of his greatest enemy, because he sees himself as the ultimate failure. By becoming Doom, Reed carries the weight of all his sins, living as a self-imposed outcast while trying desperately to redeem his past mistakes. And despite the mask, Reed's score as a hero never fully disappears. As Doom, he continues to work for the good of the planet in his own harsh, utilitarian way. He engineers solutions to the cosmic-level problems Earth faces in this era, grappling with threats like the Celestials. And in this way, Reed Richards becoming Doctor Doom is not about power. It's about punishment and responsibility. It's about a man who cannot forgive himself, even as he tries to save the world. He wears the mask not to hide from others, but to face himself every single day. Superior Spider-Man. A version where Dr. Octopus takes over Peter Parker's body and becomes a darker, more ruthless Spider-Man. Introduced in The Amazing Spider-Man 698 in 2012 and continuing in Superior Spider-Man 1 in 2013, the storyline completely changed the dynamic of what it means to be Spider-Man, proving that with great powers comes a very different kind of responsibility. The transformation into this character happened when Dr. Octopus, dying from a terminal illness, devised one final master plan. Using his advanced intellect, he successfully switched minds with Peter Parker, leaving Peter trapped in his frail, dying body while Otto claimed Peter's youthful, superpowered form. And despite Peter's attempts to reverse the process, he ultimately died in Otto's failing body, leaving Dr. Octopus as the new Spider-Man. Otto saw this new identity as a chance to prove that he could be a better Spider-Man than Peter ever was. He declared himself the superior Spider-Man, and immediately revolutionized the way Spider-Man operated. Using his scientific genius, ruthless tactics, and complete lack of mercy, Otto turned Spider-Man into a far more efficient but brutal protector of New York. One of the key differences between the two characters was Otto's refusal to hold back. He upgraded the suit, adding mechanical arms similar to his former Doc Ock appendages, making himself deadlier than ever. He installed spy drones across the city, creating a surveillance network that allowed him to anticipate crime before it happened. He also brutally beat his enemies, sometimes to near death, and even killed criminals when he deemed it necessary, something Peter would never do. But Otto didn't just want to be a more effective Spider-Man, he also sought to be a more successful Peter Parker. Using his intellect, he earned a doctorate, became a respected scientist, and even took Peter's company Parker Industries to new heights. In many ways, he outperformed Peter in his own life. However, despite his brilliance, Superior Spider-Man was far from perfect. His arrogance and lack of emotional understanding made him increasingly isolated. He alienated Peter's loved ones, treated his allies as pawns, and started believing that his authoritarian rule over New York was necessary for true justice. And his actions became more extreme, and his unchecked ego nearly led him down the path of becoming a full-fledged supervillain in Spider-Man's body. And the breaking point came when Otto faced a threat he couldn't overcome: the Green Goblin. Realizing that despite all his intelligence, he lacked the heart and selflessness that made Peter Parker truly superior. So he willingly erased himself, restoring Peter's consciousness so he could save the city. In the end, Otto acknowledged that Peter Parker was the true Spider-Man, proving that heroism isn't just about efficiency, but about sacrifice and heart. So while Otto Octavius eventually lost the mantle, his time as Spider-Man showed that even villains, when given the chance, can try to be heroes, but their nature will always catch up to them. Cosmic Ghost Rider. He is one of the most terrifying and overpowered versions of Frank Castle. He is an insane fusion of the Punisher, Ghost Rider, and a Herald of Galactus. This variant takes the already brutal and relentless nature of Frank Castle and applies it with supernatural and cosmic power. First introduced in Thanos 13 in 2017, his origin is set in a dystopian future where Thanos has conquered all life. In this timeline, the Punisher, who has already spent a lifetime waging war on criminals, finds himself alone after Earth's heroes are wiped out. Without crime to fight, Frank is left with nothing but rage and regret, and when he dies, his soul is sent to hell. However, instead of finding peace, Frank makes a deal with Mephisto, becoming the new Ghost Rider, the spirit of vengeance, in exchange for the chance to keep punishing the wicked. But by the time Frank is reborn as Ghost Rider, he realizes it's too late. Earth is already dead, and Thanos has won. Left with no one to punish, he wanders alone for centuries, going mad in the process. Eventually, Galactus arrives, seeking help against Thanos, and Frank, desperate for purpose, agrees to serve him, gaining the power cosmic and and becoming his new herald. Now wielding the flames of hell and the cosmic might of a herald, he transforms into something completely new, an unstoppable force with the power of God and the mind of a lunatic. And in the Thanos Wins storyline, Cosmic Ghost Rider serves King Thanos as his loyal companion and executioner, aiding the Mad Titan in conquering and destroying all opposition across the universe. Despite his overwhelming power, Frank Castle becomes somewhat resigned to this dark role, accepting it as part of his eternal punishment. As of his abilities, they include Hellfire Manipulation. As Ghost Rider, he can summon and control Hellfire, which burns the souls of his enemies. Power Cosmic, thanks to Galactus, he has reality wrapping abilities, near invincibility, and cosmic level energy attacks, superhuman strength and durability, and his Ghost Rider chains are now infused with cosmic energy, and his stare, which forces victims to relive their worst sins, is even more devastating due to his cosmic enhancement. And one of the most insane aspects of Cosmic Ghost Rider's story comes after Galactus falls, and he is once again left alone. When Thanos finally kills him, he is sent to Valhalla, where Odin offers him a chance at redemption. Instead of choosing peace, Frank asks to be sent back in time, to kill baby Thanos, before he becomes a monster. However, once he arrives, he can't bring himself to kill the child, and instead decides to raise him differently, hoping to prevent him from becoming the Mad Titan. And this leads to one of the wildest and most chaotic alternate Marvel stories ever, as Cosmic Ghost Rider tries and fails to raise Thanos into a better person, only to realize some monsters are inevitable. Cosmic Ghost Rider still follows Frank Castle's core belief, punishing the guilty. But as he learns, ultimate power doesn't mean ultimate justice. His story is a wild mix of darkness, humor, and literally cosmic insanity, making him one of the most unforgettable, evilish versions of the Punisher in Marvel history.